And this is where it is located now. So the shroud, the first verifiable appearance of the Shroud of Turin was in 1354 in a little church in Liry, France. So that was the first verifiable appearance of this piece of cloth, of the shroud. There's a lot of evidence, a lot of stories of it being in other places before this, being paraded around as a religious relic. It perhaps spent time in Constantinople for a while. It may or may not have been stolen during the Spanish Inquisition, may not have been hidden in a wall for a couple of centuries to protect it from outside enemies and all kinds of stories. But the first verifiable sighting or appearance of the shroud was in 1354 in Liry, France. And so it stayed there for a couple hundred years. And then there was a fire in the church in 1532. So a couple hundred years later, the fire did a little bit of damage to the shroud. And so if you remember that there were some dark patches on the sides of the shroud, that is actually from fire damage during this fire in 1532. Now, fortunately, the actual image of the man, I believe Jesus Christ, was not damaged in this fire. So there were just some burned places on the sides of the shroud. I believe God protected it. So, but after that, it was moved to a place that was considered safer, which is right here. And this is the Chapel of the Holy Shroud in Turin, France. And so that is where the shroud gets its name, Shroud of Turin, from the place where it has been for the last 450 years. And so it is still here today in Turin, Turin, Italy. All right. And it's been there since 1578. All right. So there was a very, very interesting thing that happened at the end of the 1800s that was kind of like a big breakthrough about the nature of the image on the shroud. And so this happened in 1898, and there was a lawyer named an Italian lawyer named Secondo Pia. So Secondo Pia. So he took a photograph, the very first photograph that was ever taken of the shroud cloth. And when he looked at the negative of the photograph that he had taken, he was astounded to see. And let me show you what he saw. Okay, so first, this is the actual shroud. Okay, and that's the face. If you can see the close-up, it's very faint. So you can see the nose and the mouth and the eyes. So that's the actual shroud. And when he looked at his negative of the face, this is what he saw. All right, so can you see that? Can you see how that looks much more like an actual face? Because it looks more 3D. The actual lights and darks would be what you would see if you're actually looking at a face, rather than what you are seeing when you look at the shroud. And so this was amazing, because what they realized when he looked at this negative was that the shroud itself is actually a negative image. So that when he looked at the negative, it was a positive. Now, does everybody understand how this works? I think because now of the digital age, there may be a lot of people who don't understand how negative photography works. Now, I worked as a photographer for decades. In fact, I was a black room lab tech, black room. Hold on, let me back over. Dark room, a dark room lab technician for many, many years when I was in college. That was one of my jobs when I was in college. So I was also a photographer. And this is way before the digital age. And so we would take photographs with film. Remember that? Remember that stuff? Film, and then have to develop the film. And then I actually enlarged my own photographs in a dark room. So I would put the negatives in an enlarger and shine it onto photo paper and develop it myself. So I knew how to do all that stuff. That was part of my job. So it was very fascinating. So if you don't know how negatives work, this is how they work. So negatives show an inverted image of the actual image. So anything that would be white would be black in the negative, and vice versa. And so what you are looking at here in the actual shroud is a negative version, an inverted image of the actual, what you would actually see if you looked at the face of the man that is shown on the shroud. So this was crazy, because photography had only been invented in 1822. So before photography was invented, this was 1898 when this picture was taken. Before photography had been invented, nobody would have had any idea about a negative image. There was no reason for anybody to know that. So that was really a sign that this might not be a hoax after all, because somebody back in the 1300s or earlier, when this would have had to have been made, if it is a forgery, they wouldn't have had any idea about a negative image. So it was really mind-boggling. It was just quite a mystery. And I'm going to show you a couple more. This is a negative of the whole body. So you can see even more how this looks more like you're just looking at somebody standing in a dark room, perhaps. And the light is shining on him where it would naturally shine on a body if you were looking at it in reality, rather than the negative image that we see on the shroud itself. So it was just so incredibly confusing and mysterious. And so I want to show you this as well. So you can see them both at the same time, juxtaposed against each other. So you've got the shroud on the left here, and then it has been enhanced a little bit, but this is a negative image on the right. So you can see the negative and the positive. So how in the world could this be? Nobody had any answer to this.